So this week I wanted to have a better Edmonton Oilers related segment to start with than the one that I'm actually going to wind up having to start with. I actually had this great segment in mind. It was going to be like the psychology of Connor McDavid and the way that he has continuously improved his play despite the fact that he is probably the one guy in the league who doesn't really need to improve all that much. Unfortunately, there was another Oilers related story that did come up. And it is Oilers related simply due to the presence on the team of Duncan Keith. And of course, so then what we're talking about is we're talking about this absolutely heartbreaking, confidence-shattering report on the Kyle Beach situation that came out this last week. It was conducted by a Chicago area law firm, basically talking about the way that the team had handled, the complaints of sexual assault that were brought forward by Kyle Beach in the 2010-2011 season. And if you wanted a full rundown of that whole thing, you're not going to find it here. There's other people out there who have already done this. They've done it better than I have. As much as I hate to pump Steve Dangle's tires at all, Steve Dangle actually has a really good segment on his podcast about this. So if you want to know all of the little details, all of the nitty-gritty, little grotesque, disgusting, disturbing, heartbreaking, you will want to cry when you are done details, that's the place to go. I'm going to zero in on a couple of specific details that I think actually have quite a bit to do potentially with Duncan Keith, with his leadership role on that Blackhawks team. And some of the questions that we are going to have to beg that he answers, that he has good answers for. Because the things that he said so far, they really don't cut the mustard. So the way that I'm really going to get into this, I'm going to say something that I think is going to require a lot of explanation. Please bear with me. We are not at a stage right now where hockey should need Sheldon Kennedy. And so Sheldon Kennedy, I think that anybody who is a hockey fan knows all about this. He was one of the victims of Graham James, during his tenure on the Swift Current Broncos as their head coach. He went on to victimize many other players over many other years. Sheldon Kennedy has been the foremost crusader, to root out and eliminate, sexual predation upon hockey players by coaches. And so when I say that hockey is at the point now where we shouldn't need Sheldon Kennedy anymore, what I mean to say is that Sheldon Kennedy's mission should be accomplished. We should be taking this thing so seriously that it can't happen at any level of the game. But now as we look at this report that comes out of the Chicago Blackhawks, the simple fact of the matter is now we need Sheldon Kennedy again. We've never stopped needing him. So the specific detail that I'm going to focus in on right now, the first one, is the specific detail that then Blackhawks video coach Brad Aldrich was actually able to intimidate and coerce his victims into this situation by threatening their careers. He basically told them that he was big enough, he was bad enough, he was powerful enough within the Blackhawks organization and within hockey as a whole, that he could completely destroy their careers. He could destroy their finances. He could punish them in ways that they couldn't imagine within the hockey world if they didn't give him what they wanted. And so Kyle Beach, he did, in the end, succumb to that coercion. That's a horrible way to say it. That's a horrible way to say it. If there's a better way to say it, please let me know. But I don't mean to blame him for his own victimization or suggest that it happened to him because he was weak. No, I refuse to hold any such opinion. But one way or the other, that was the way that it happened. And so the question that I have is, how did it ever get to be the point in this league where a video coach thinks that he's powerful enough to do that to a player? Especially when you consider the fact that there are 3 other players out there that were at that time responsible for making sure, you had some responsibility for making sure that something like this couldn't happen to another player. Of course, I'm talking about team captain Jonathan Toews, assistant captain Patrick Kane, assistant captain and now Edmonton Oiler Duncan Keith. So is it entirely possible that a guy like Brad Aldrich, could be, bigger, better, more powerful in the hockey world than Kyle Beach, who at that point was just a black ace on the Chicago Blackhawks during their Stanley Cup run? Yeah, sadly that's possible. But is it possible that he's bigger, better, more powerful, able to destroy the career of Duncan Keith at that particular stage of his career? No, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, the opposite was definitely the case. If Duncan Keith were to have gone to the coaches and say, hey, look, something like this happened, this guy needs to get the hell out of here. And if he's here, I'll be elsewhere, one way or the other. Well, then that does it for Brad Aldrich. That does it right then, right there. And so that leads us to the next question that I have. And these two are directly related. And the first is that, okay, so if Duncan Keith knew what had gone on there, then Duncan Keith definitely had the power to stop that, to make sure that Brad Aldrich paid the price for it immediately. So now the question, of course, becomes, did Duncan Keith know? Duncan Keith so far has told us that he didn't know. And I'm not going to argue that with him. I know there are a lot of people who are out there willing to argue that he had to have known, that he did know, that he must have known. I don't know the contents of Duncan Keith's mind. I'm not going to make that argument. But I am going to raise a question as to, if he didn't know, why didn't he know? Because that is a pivotally important question. Because quite frankly, as a leader on that team, as an assistant captain on that team, it's his responsibility to know what's going on with the players on that team. So far the question has been, did you know? No? Okay. But that's not good enough. Now we need to know, why didn't you know? Why didn't you know? How couldn't you know? One other detail that's been brought forward, and this is a sticking point between myself and at least one other individual on Twitter, is that Duncan Keith was present at practices, in subsequent seasons, where apparently Kyle Beach was chased around the ice. He was called the F-bomb, not that F-bomb, the other F-bomb, by players on the team, and some of them even asked if he had liked giving the quote-unquote BJ. So obviously, a lot of players on that team did know. And it's actually not even surprising that they would know, because Brad Aldrich at this point, he had already threatened to ruin the career of Kyle Beach. And simply put, the pieces of garbage that do this kind of stuff are definitely not as good as their word. And they do like to prey on people even beyond that. So I have no doubt in my mind that Brad Aldrich probably went to quite a few other players on this team and told them a story about what had gone on between him and Kyle Beach. Maybe not necessarily the truth, but definitely something that planted this story in their minds so that he could be abused and harassed in this way by other players on these teams. And let's face it, it's not like it would all be unlike pro sports. To have a few narcissists on the roster. The kind of people that would get pleasure out of harassing somebody over this sort of thing. We saw that was the case. Duncan Keith saw it going on. And so at that point, he must have known that there was something that had to be addressed. And so what kind of action did he take within the locker room at that point? Did he go to these other players that were doing this thing and saying to them at least, hey, what's that all about? Because let's face it, he could be witnessing that and just think to himself that, maybe it's just hockey players, being common jackasses. As much as we might love the sport of hockey, that would not be unheard of either, would it? But now we know in this situation that that's not what this was. And if Duncan Keith were to tell us that he didn't know that it was anything more than that, well, okay, but fine, but I still have the question. Why didn't you know? Like, why didn't you ask the kind of questions that might have helped you uncover this thing so that maybe it could have been dealt with properly, almost a decade ago, as opposed to a decade later? I feel like there are fans out there that want to use this story as some kind of catalyst to get rid of Duncan Keith because they were never in favor of him coming to the team in the first place. I'm not one of them. I don't really think bad things about Duncan Keith. I don't really want to think bad things about Duncan Keith. But I look at what's gone on and what this report tells us, and I just have too many questions to look away. Now, unfortunately, I'm not a big, powerful Sportsnet broadcaster. I'm not a TSN hockey journalist. I don't really have the power to hold Duncan Keith to these questions. I'm just some guy sitting in a hockey arena with a cell phone and a selfie stick and a microphone. And this is all I got right here, this one bitty cannon. So I don't really have I don't really have the power or the ability to put that question to Duncan Keith and to make him answer, but I hope to God that somebody who does, somebody who has a bigger cannon than this, I hope that they do stick that thing in his face and they do ask him some important questions, that they do ask him, how didn't you know? Why didn't you know? What did you do when you saw all of these other things going on? And if you did nothing, why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you go find these answers? You were a leader on this team. It was your responsibility. And now you're a leader on our team. And if anything like this happens on our team while you're here, you will have the same responsibility now as you did then. We need to know that we can count on you. I want to know that I can count on you. But we need to have the answers. We can't do without them.